So as I mentioned, at the Playwrights Center, we've been extremely busy rolling out a whole new spring season of programming online, partially to ensure that conversations like the one with Kate today can happen as we seek solace with one another, and partially and primarily to ensure that we are creating employment for theater artists right now. And we are getting very close to having now hitting the 200 mark, 200 playwrights and theater artists getting compensated for their work, for their sharing, for articles, for seminars, for play readings. And we're very proud to be part of that part of the process. If you're interested in joining us for any more of this programming, please check out pwcenter.org and sign up for whatever moves you. Today we are so fortunate to have with us the one and only Kate Hamill. Kate is an actor and a playwright based in New York. She is one of the most produced playwrights in the country. She specializes in feminist, highly theatrical adaptations of classics, including and not limited to Sense and Sensibility, Vanity Fair, Little Women, Dracula, The Scarlet Letter. I'm holding a lot of space for The Scarlet Letter, and Pride and Prejudice, as you can see in a poster just behind you. In Minneapolis, her work has been seen with the Guthrie, where the world premiere of Emma was scheduled to premiere this past month. The Jungle Theater, Park Square Theater, and Theater Latte Da, and theaters all over the world. At the center here, we had the great fortune of partnering with Sarah Rasmussen and the Jungle Theater to develop Kate's adaptation of the beautiful, beautiful adaptation of Little Women a couple of years ago, which of course has since been blazing a trail around the country. And I feel very strongly, Kate, that your work will continue to resonate and find homes and homes and homes again because of not only the stories that you are working with, but because of your artistry and how you're telling those stories and how we need them more than ever. And I think thinking about that too, you know, Kate, going through this moment is teaching us whole new ideas and understandings of the world. That's a lot of what you and I have started talking about. And at the Playwrights Center, we're really leaning deeply into that sort of, those muscles that we've built up over the years as an artist service organization. Our work exists to support individual artists. Their work, their lives, the whole picture, it remains at the forefront of all that we do. So there's these ideas around how any of us right now are approaching our work, trusting our voices, challenging what we thought we knew, but also know that listening even deeper could reveal something else entirely, probably practices we need to let go of, things that we have to move out of the way in order to get closer to our real values, our real vision. And I know it's made a lot of us think about the opportunity that's in front of us right now, that as theater artists, the idea of change and reinvention is in our DNA. It's a part naturally of any artistic process. So I think even more so that we are seeing this opportunity as a time to where we look to our artists like you, our brilliant, expressive thinkers and storytellers who continue to demonstrate real leadership as individual artists at this time. And that we recognize while certain dynamics will probably go back to some version of where they were before this moment, most will change, many will have to change. Most historians, and Kate, I'm crediting you, you and I talked about an article, you can share about this more in a second, but we were talking about that, and I read something else about it recently. Most historians offer that there have been these post-crisis periods, basically, where true recreation and reimagining has happened. And as you talked about, Kate, the other day, and I'd love to talk about more today, that we see it transpire more quickly and more deeply than it would otherwise. And that the converse is, of course, that the attempt to go back to the way it was is going to end up in some sort of vacuum, reaching for something that no longer works or exists anyway. So Kate and I, for all of you, thought we'd try to approach the conversation today with about as much honesty and clarity as we could muster, given what we know so far, just sharing our own personal experiences to articulate what we're feeling and seeing is working and where are some places for new opportunities. And of course, as a reminder, just that you're hearing from Kate and I, our specific opinions on the first part of this, and that the reason there's a Q&A is that we want to hear from all of you. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What do you want to challenge right now? So Kate, maybe if we can start by kind of going back a little to go forwards, is that okay? And
sure.
You know, I have spent the last number of years getting to know your work all over the place. And maybe if we have some people that don't know all of it yet, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your story, kind of where you come from and how you decided to be a playwright. Like, how did this process happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, I started out, I got my degree in acting, uh, uh, a BFA in acting, and I started out as, I always say, hate saying just an actor, but I started out as just an actor, and I moved to the city, got my equity card quite young, and started, I was working, I was auditioning for things, and I had been here a couple of years, and I quickly got really frustrated with the dearth of feminist storytelling, and also the dearth of fully realized female roles. I was quite often going in for auditions where it was like 400 women auditioning to play some cardboard cutout of a woman, someone's wife or girlfriend or prostitute, someone who was either thwarting or aiding the male protagonist on his way. And what was really frustrating to me about that was that women, I, like many other people who went to school for theater, my class was more women than men. And I just saw all around me women, and it was only a few years out, I was only a few years out of school, were just dropping out of the business left and right because of the inequities that they were finding. And I particularly love the classics. So that was doubly true in the classics. And, then there famously like 16 male roles to every female role of any substance in Shakespeare. And so I made a bet with my friend that I could write a new feminist classic, because I was frustrated that even stories that are like classic stories, and I can go into why I'm interested in the classics specifically, that were originally by female authors, were almost always told through a male gaze. So at that time, and this was around 2010, virtually all stage adaptations of Jane Austen, Louisa May Alcott, all these female writers, most of them were actually by men that were being widely produced. So I bet my friend $100 that I could write a new feminist classic. I had been writing some short plays, and I got a little bit of attention for those. And honestly, I was in like kind of a dark period of my life. So probably I was chasing the feeling of getting a little bit of good attention, as sometimes one does. And I wrote my friend a check, and I gave myself 6 months, and that was my first play, which was Sense and Sensibility. I started out with Jane Austen because she examines hypocrisy. She has a good sense of humor, and she is a lot talking about the clash between what society requires of you and what your conscience dictates from you, which is something that's really interesting to me, as well as classism. And since then, and then I just, that play was first produced in 2014. And since then, I've just been, I have just been writing and writing and writing. I do still work as an actor, including in my own stuff, but I do quite a lot of feminist adaptations of the classics, and the reason why I do that is because I feel like the classics are very much cultural touchstones for us, so they shape us as much as we are ever shaped by them. You see that everywhere, that people, that's kind of how we teach ourselves what is the hero's journey, who is the protagonist of any given story. So it's very important to me as a feminist playwright to turn that on its ear in the most inclusive, progressive way possible, and to make adaptations that are radical adaptations, so that are quite specifically not sort of just like traditional takes on the story, that are trying to shake them up. And and I write quite a bit of new stuff as well, which is starting to get produced, but the adaptations came first. And that's sort of how I started.
Can I ask you, when you think about approaching your work as an artist,
Yeah.
as an actor versus as a writer, does kind of what you were just talking about, does that shift in terms of how you approach the work because one's more generative, one's more responsive, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is I tend to think of, and when I have my inevitable breakdown, everyone can talk about this moment. I tend to think of the actor and writer as two different people. So you know, Ghostbusters, Dana and Zool. I think of the playwright as like Dana, and the actor is like Zool. Because at some point, if I'm in one of my own plays, there is no Dana, there is only Zool. Like, you know, they're just slightly different. As a playwright, I feel like I have to be, I'm shaping my story towards more a central question or a theme. So I have to have more emotional removed from the characters. I do have to not judge them, but I do have to sort of abandon them to their respective fates. And when I'm in something, especially something that when I'm in my own work, which I quite often am, I have to just forget the overall arc of the thing. But because they come at different points of a process, it's not, again, I just think of them as two totally different people with two totally different objectives. You know, it's funny because in some ways, like once I started playwriting, I was like, oh, and it's not that I think acting is incredibly vulnerable and brave and terrifying in its way still after all of these years. I still get nervous before every show, but in a way it's like a relief to just act and stuff because you're just responsible for managing one part of the story versus it's so funny whenever I sit out in the house of like a first preview of one of my plays that I'm not in, I'm always like, oh my God, if this is bad, I've ruined everyone's night. Like I've done such a disservice to all of these characters. It's a pure and I envy people who seem to have no crisis of confidence ever. I always have a moment where I'm like, this is so mortifying. What have I done?
Can I go back to the bet for a second? I'm curious, holding on to the bet and holding on to utter mortification of first preview.
Yes.
Where's the moment where when you thought about that bet and you thought about the emotional and creative and spiritual place that you were, which was a hard place, right? So much of our great work comes from these moments of like, this is not working anymore. This is not how I'm choosing to define myself or how I want others to define me, right? When you think about a certain moment so far in these years, and it can be acting, but my guess is maybe you're feeling it more with the writing because that was sort of that action. Yeah. Where was a moment, like a really specific moment where you were like, oh, see there, now that is what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. And now I'm looking at it on that stage. That scene was beautiful, or those actors totally, like I'm looking at her in a way that I never would have gotten to before.
I mean, there are always, the thing I like about theater work specifically is it is both large scale and small scale at the same time. That there are always moments in a rehearsal room where I go, oh God, that is, just brilliant and so much better than I ever could have pictured. In a more big picture way, there have been moments when I've been really proud that the paradigm has shifted in terms of how much work is, broadening the scope of how much of who is the protagonist, the story is about in the national theater scene. And when I think that I've contributed to that, I feel really proud of that, and also feel, as they say in Spider-Man, with great, with power comes responsibility. I feel like a responsibility. I feel very much the honor and responsibility of being in a place where for many, many years, these stories were dominated by different kinds of voices. And so I feel like, okay, if I have the chance to have a little bit more of a voice, then I have to wield that power responsibly and ethically. Yeah, so there are always moments, I mean, for all the mortification and the moments of self-doubt, there are always moments when I think, wow, that came out really beautifully, or wow, that really moved someone, or wow, that worked much better than I thought it would. Something that, I mean, and sometimes it's so small. We did a week of rehearsal on Emma at the Guthrie before sort of everything closed down. Unfortunately, that couldn't happen. There's a hypochondriac character in that play, Mr. Woodhouse, and David Kelly, who was playing the role, he had a moment where he was doing the scene and he took out a little thing of hand sanitizer and used it as part of the character. And I was like, he was building off the text, but he made it his own thing. And that's an example. I mean, David's a genius. That's an example of like something so small that in that moment, I just felt like pure joy. I mean, the whole rehearsal room was just crying. It was so funny because, of course, it's Jermaine. But but there are always moments like that. And an interesting place I often find it is auditions, which is funny because as an actor, auditioning is, of course, not always your favorite part of the job. I don't love doing it myself. But when I see an actor come in and just kill a scene and bring a new thing to it, I find that very moving because I feel proud that the work can serve them in that way.
It's interesting that you're saying auditions, because if I think about all the places, and we start doing the math real quickly about audiences, the amount of people that have seen, the amount of young people, the amount of young women, the amount of young trans and non-binary folks who are seeing what is being, and I think, you know, kind of these classic works or these sort of canonical novels done in a way, I remember feeling with Little Women immediately, you know, in terms of what you were working on, what Sarah Rasmussen was working on, whatever the whole team, the actors were bringing to the table. There was so much learning. And I just think about, then I multiply that times, you know, 200 people a night or 500 people a night or 1,000 people a night seeing storytelling in that way. And I think about that impact you're having. And I think it is, with great power comes great responsibility. And I'm glad that the responsibility is in your hand. It makes me feel safe as an audience member when I'm there, that if I want to bring my son, that's the way that I want a young man in this world to understand this story. So I think it's, you know, it's as much about how we're also raising young men today too, you know, not to put the dudes back in it, but in that way, like that whole piece of that conversation feels really
well. And for me, that is a big part of it too. That's why when I started, and to this day, I have yet to write an all-female play, although that would be kind of like, I have some ideas and it would be kind of cool, but I do want to create work for men as well in quote unquote women's stories, because I just feel like, you know, I don't want there to be, sometimes there's such a stratification of things, and I really want to sort of kick down. When I started doing the classics, I kind of like, I didn't want to decorate the castle. I wanted to kick down the doors and let all the people in. And yeah, it's important. My little nephew, little boy, comes to my plays, and it's so gratifying to see him just be able to project himself onto like a Joe March or you know, Lizzie Bennett.
God, I love that. Oh, your work with Joe is really, really good. I love that. And it's not about exclusivity, as you're saying. It's just also, but I think there is, art and storytelling have the opportunity to recenter. Yeah. And I think for me, that's one of the greatest things that you do as an artist, as a painter, is that you are just choosing where our gaze is looking, and that it is actually important for people to learn that they are not always the center of the story, no matter what body they're born into and what they're told about them. And that's one of the things that I really love. Let's change the center, you know. I want to go back a little bit to the hand sanitizer. And just think a little bit forward. You've got a bunch of projects in front of you. I'm and know it to be true. And I'm curious if the past couple of months, as you take so much of the world into your work, both in original playwriting and also in adaptive work, I'm curious about what your feeling will go into these new projects that you're taking with you emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, in these ideas of how the world that we'll start now kind of putting out there more, how might the world shift? How is that affecting your work as you're writing forward?
You know, it's so funny because in order to tell stories, I think we have to have some removed from them. So in order to sort of get to a place of catharsis. So I have not been able to, I'm working on a couple of adaptations and a couple of new things. And one of my new things is set in what was present day. And all of a sudden I'm struggling with, well, should I really set it in about 2018, 2019? Because without, I just don't know, because I don't have any remove from the situation right now. We're so in the middle of it. I don't feel like I can write directly about this situation. I guess it might change. But because I haven't come to any kind of catharsis about it, I feel like I can't put that in the work. But what's interesting is it seeps into everything that I'm trying to write, or like some echo of it is coming into everything. I'm working on an adaptation of the Odyssey right now. And the Odyssey for me is very much about, okay, if something bad has happened to you, or if you have gone through something traumatic, how do you heal from that? And that question, which was slightly, it just all of a sudden became, it just, as I do a rewrite on it, it's scoping out to, okay, what happens when a whole society has something really bad happen to it, and how do you heal from that? I have some other, The Scarlet Letter, which was supposed to go up at South Coast Rep in April and have its world premiere, and that production was canceled, and now is having its world premiere next year at the McCarter, where Sarah is going to be the new artistic director. That play has a lot of, is a lot also about healing and how to heal if you feel very ashamed about something you've done, which seemed to be floating in my head when I was writing two plays. But it's also a lot about America and these sort of original sins of America, and are coming to terms with our history. And all of a sudden, as I look towards the world premiere of it being in March, I just think I have to be very specific about Americans looking back at repeating mistakes, because I think we are repeating some big mistakes right now. And I feel like the mistake in rewriting the play would be to pretend like nothing happened. And, you know, I think the biggest mistake I can make right now as I generate new work, and this is, I'm just speaking for me, is burying my head in the sand and pretending that nothing happened, trying to sort of recreate an old world. Like, the old world is dead. This is a new world. So while not every play has to be a coronavirus play, obviously, in fact, I don't think I'm capable at the moment of writing a coronavirus play, I do have to keep in mind that people will be coming in with a slightly different lens, because my lens is different. So I have to put that into the work. Also, funnily enough, The Scarlet Letter has a lot of references about sickness and sickness spreading, because the Puritans very much thought of sin within a community as a sickness. And so if you are impure, you can infect a whole community. And I'm like, oh God. I wrote this in 2018, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to take a real look at that, because obviously it's going to hit the audience differently. And again, that's just a sense of responsibility, making sure I say the things that I want to say about it. And yeah, but it is interesting to as we were talking about this article, which was in Slate about the misconception is after a period of crisis that everyone will want to go right back to the status quo. But actually, if you look at history, after a period of crisis is when revolutions happen and when actually a lot of change occurs. In our lifetimes, we can think of September 11th. A lot of things changed. You can't just wish the world back to what it was. So you might as well work for the change that you want. So a lot of questions I've been asking myself, and it's so funny, just yesterday I was in the car with my husband and I was saying, oh my God, 2 months ago today was my first rehearsal of Emma. That's how fast everything has changed. So I have to give myself time to react to that. But I feel like I do have to ask myself, what do I want next? And that's something I'm dealing with a lot. If all of a sudden I'm actually fortunate in that I'm able to write more in a more open way. A lot of theater companies that are still commissioning are more like, what do you want to write? Because they're a little bit less focused on, we need this for, 6 months from now, which I've done before. Then what do I really want to do next? And that's been an interesting ongoing question because, I'm sort of trying to find what I really want to do next.
So a moment ago, you were talking about, I think, using the word mistakes, and then you were also using the word change a lot. And I kind of want to go back to that change to move us forward, which is this opportunity to change that we're all facing right now. And we had I think we've been having a series of conversations here at the center publicly in sort of online and stuff about what inequities have we that are not different than they were 2 months ago. Moments like this also just expose that. Where are we seeing our most vulnerable folks? And I'm thinking a lot in particular about different Native American Indigenous tribes in this country, in Canada, and around the world right now, where the inequity around how communities are being hit is massive because of the lack of care, the lack of government support and stuff going forward. And I, certainly also thinking about a number of communities of color that are being hit, as we're seeing around the world and in huge ways. So the opportunity to change is partially just to stop and recognize and understand these systems of inequity and what then the opportunity is in front of us. Yeah. So we kind of take that into the performing arts sector. When we think a little bit about freelance artists and institutions, that tension that's been in place for a long time, lots of progress that's been made in the last number of years, lots of challenge that's still there. And these moments of crisis really mean some people are like taking the breath and kind of acting through their breath. And some people are sort of holding their breath and acting through their lungs being constricted. And you can kind of feel those things, Yeah. And I guess I'm wondering for you, you've worked at so many theaters as both an actress and a writer. What are you feeling like, kind of going back to what you were saying a moment ago? What are some of these practices, or what's a practice that you think we have the opportunity to change going forward?
I mean, to be honest, something that is a big thing for me that I blow the horn on a lot and that I think people are pretty uncomfortable with is I think we have a lot of reluctance in the theater community to address Me Too issues. Like, it's definitely an issue in our community, and there's been a real reluctance to face it head on. Including amongst, I'm a member of the Actors Equity Union. I'm a proud member of Actors Equity, but Actors Equity itself tends to refer things back to employers. And for me, something that I think a lot is we can't possibly be working towards a more equitable field if there is predation within our field. So if we are taking what is a completely unwelcome pause, we are being forced to take a pause, then now is the time when we could be, start creating the policies now. And I do think there is some progress being made on that, but being really formulating policies now that'll protect people in the future, because we're going to have to restart the American theater after this. We just will. That becomes increasingly clear. And we can't restart it with the same old sins. There's a lot of inherent classism in theater, because, which, you can argue there are a whole bunch of causes behind that, including the fact that a lot of people can't afford to even consider life as a freelance theater artist. But it would be really interesting if in this time, and I also acknowledge that a lot of not only individuals but institutions are in major existential crisis right now, is it would be really interesting if in this time we could start thinking about how to make it so you actually can, more people actually can have equity, economic equities from the beginning. Yeah, my big things are, I'm big on the Me Too thing in American theater. I think we just have to deal with it. It's been a big problem for a long time, and we are reluctant to deal with it. Classism, racism, and sexism. I think there's been a lot of progress towards addressing these issues, but yeah, if we have to come back, we have to, now's the time to start sort of daydreaming of the structures that can help us address it. What I'm terrified of, and I'll just name what I'm scared of, is there's a huge, for the theaters that do survive, and I do think some theaters will not survive, which is awful, there will be a huge stampede back to what is perceived safe. So toxic leadership styles, like stories by old white men. And I just think we're not making, I do think at the end of this, Netflix is great. We all enjoy watching trash like Tiger King, but the grief and the pain you're seeing people go through is just an indication of how important theater is, that we actually need to be in the same space together. Our communities will need the catharsis and the healing, and they'll desperately want it. So now's the time to start thinking of, okay, what stories that aren't these very, very traditional stories what will we use to sort of justify going forward? I'm not existentially worried about the art form of theater, but I am worried that in a fight for existential survival, theaters will stampede back to just what seems like the safest choices, and the people who look, like traditional leadership, and that even if that traditional leadership is extremely toxic, and we just can't afford to do that. I don't think we're making a good argument for our own survival if we do that.
Yeah, and the flip is thinking about so many in this new generation of leaders who are not new leaders, but new to their positions right now. I think about Hannah Sharif and Nataki Garrett and Stephanie Ibarra and Jacob Padron and Maria Goyanis, and I think about Marissa Wolf, and I think about Mariah C. Kaminsky and Sarah Rasmussen, and I think about Jamil Jude, and the list goes on and on about people who are Courtney Sale at Merrimack, people who I'm really believing, and I'm really excited to see where they take organizations. And I think I'm really hoping one thing, I'm gonna throw in hope for a quick second and say that I believe and I hope, because I for 10 years have been part of the Twin Cities theater community. I deeply believe in the local. I deeply believe in the regional. I deeply believe in the state of Minnesota. I believe in the arts here. I believe in the rural arts community here. I believe in the urban arts communities here, and all of the many, many cross intersections of arts here. I do hope that we can continue to focus on taking care of our local arts communities. It's a little bit different in New York, I know, in certain kinds of ways, but there are so many. I think about the amazing arts organizations in Detroit and in Milwaukee and in Nashville and in Seattle and Portland and DC and Baltimore, the amazing places in Baltimore. And I think about all of those communities, and I think about what the focus and excellence, there was a foundation in Atlanta that created a fund this past week for small and mid-size theater companies, I think only specifically. And it just meant that places like Theatrical Outfit and Dad's Garage and, Actors Express, the amazing Synchronicity that Rachel runs, all dedicated to women's work. There's just these amazing companies that were getting support, and I hope for the local. I hope we choose to look at who has chosen to make their lives in a space, and that we really support local.
And what's amazing is, again, like trying to see at the opportunity and everything, it's never been clearer that there are things you actually can do remotely, that there is a sort of premium placed on, oh, well, I'm undercutting myself because I live in New York, but there's this sort of thing like, oh, well, that writer isn't in New York. They don't need to be in New York. There doesn't need to be such a premium on that they can actually, some of this stuff, there doesn't need to be so much resistance to having people Zoom into the first 2 weeks of their rehearsal or whatever. And I have to say, because I had schedule things, I had some stuff overlapping. I actually done some of that, and it's when you're in table work as a playwright, you're pretty justified in being able to do it from home. It's great to be in the rehearsal room, but if that's the new reality we're in, and if it empowers people who are from everywhere to be creating work, then I don't think there's much sense in resisting it. And again, I live in New York, so I'm just under. Yeah. But I think that's there has been such an incredible new wave of new leadership, and I just, so many people were just given the ship to steer before the sort of iceberg came, and I just hope that both within our communities and within, donor bases, they're given the opportunity to right the ship.
In about 5 minutes, we're going to go ahead and open up for questions. So friends at home, if you have something that you want to share, you can now or in the next 5 minutes, we'll check in again, use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen, and then Julia will kind of unmute people one at a time, and we'll go live because we both like a little risk, because we both have a little risk in our blood.
That's right.
You and me. That's how we dance. I wanna take a moment and call out some practices that I'm seeing and hearing, both from folks that are in the audience today and kind of all around the country, and thinking about not only the theater field, but some other arts practices as well. I am obviously at the Playwrights Center, we're making things up as we go, and you've heard me, state clearly, like, our priority right now, as much as anything, is about paying artists for their work. That's where we're at, and helping us figure out a path there. And I really, as you're saying, Kate, I do see these opportunities, not so much as, oh my gosh, we're making, theater is going to move to the form of Zoom. Like, I don't think anyone is confused about that. I think there are, however, other parts of our civic and artistic responsibility as organizations that our leadership has the opportunity to demonstrate right now, which is to say, I may not be able to share a production with you, but I am able to, as you're saying, within the Me Too movement, what are the practices that I can invest the few dollars I have left, to think about creating work that addresses this, or that we can share, or things like accessibility. How can organizations take this moment and say, oh, well, we can close caption things, or we could do things in a not time specific way, so that folks who have families and can't afford childcare and participating in a thing can see it online in a time that works for them. geographic isolation, geographic accessibility. We often leave out rural community. We often say, well, you're 2.5 hours away, so you should have just come to X city to that masterclass. Well, that's a hike for some people. We'd like to believe geographic accessibility is a thing we can increase. So I want to kind of transition for a little moment before we go to our questions to say, I've been thinking about people that I look to in the field, in different fields. And I want to, I guess, say this, that as I'm talking about things with hope and inspiration, Kate, that I'm also really holding a space right now. There is this, as you were saying, you know, top of the list, arts, nonprofits, top, you know, the unemployment is a lot. And there's an enormous amount of pain and confusion and uncertainty for staff, you know, working at these organizations or being currently furloughed or being laid off, jobs going away. And that also for these organizations, no one wants to be doing this. This is no position that anyone wants to be in, and that we are in this together, even if we have different ways. I'm going to talk about different ways that a few places are handling it, but there's not a right way. Everyone is trying to figure it out in their heart, in their mind, in the best possible way they can do. There's just different ways. And so at the same time, I am hearing about increasingly more kind of arts leaders, not just in theater, talk about other pieces of their values, of their vision that this moment is challenging them to live into and actually giving them the opportunity to live into. Oh, I see. If we weren't doing this and we could just focus on another thing and it weren't just a production, what else would it be? There's some interesting learning there. So first, I just want to call out here in the Twin Cities, because, you know, I love the local. In addition to everything Theater Moo is doing, and speaking of amazing leaders, Lily Tongue Crystal, and everything Lily is doing and her leadership over at Moo with these Mootini happy hours, having amazing artists talk about what they're working on and thinking about right now. There's some great programming that Moo's doing. I also want to shout out Theater Latte Da. In the last 24 hours, Peter Rothstein, the artistic director, and Alyssa Adams, who's the associate artistic director, announced an incredible move and initiative where they're committing all of next season's resources to the commissioning and development of new musical work, which we'll be prepping it for when we're all back together in the theater. And I asked Peter to share a quote with me, so he did. So I'm going to share Peter's words with you today. Peter says, "We believe we can safely implement processes to support the development of new work in person when possible and virtually when not. We will be able to employ actors, musicians, stage managers, directors, music directors, and choreographers in this process. The work of these artists came to a complete stop in mid-March. This will be a way of helping support them and keep them practicing their craft. We will also look for every opportunity to safely include audiences in this process and find creative ways of sharing the bold creativity happening in this seemingly quiet time." And I also just have to shout out that in particular, their commissioning program over time has really sought to focus on women writers, queer, trans, and non-binary writers, and writers of color. And that's really major, I think, in the musical theater field. I want to share, so focusing on new stories as a way to get back to, I can pay artists right now, and then we're going to produce this work. So you see the whole line there that's being created, Alyssa and Peter creating.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. You go.
I was just going to say, you know, when people, there have been a couple of little things. When people are like, oh, but Zoom isn't real theater. It's like, yeah, takeout from my favorite restaurant is not, it's not the same as sitting and having a meal, but it is still takeout. And I think it's so wonderful when leaders are using this time, again, an unwelcome pause, to develop and invest in their audiences and the artists, and that, like, I just, all praise.
That was, yes, you got it, Peter Rothstein from Latte Da. And I also really credit Alyssa Adams. Alyssa spent a lot of years at the Playwrights Center, and she's the associate artistic director and is really brilliantly helping Peter lead all of that new work. I want to share from Leslie Ishii, who I love, up at Perseverance Theater in Juneau, Alaska. And I love how they're speaking about their work right now. I asked Leslie, and Leslie says, I'm hoping is joining us, maybe with us today. Leslie says, in these uncertain times, we at Perseverance Theatre continue to take our nonprofit status seriously, and we are of service for the public good of our communities first. So we are creating PSAs in collaboration with the city and hospital public information officers that promote the messaging of our cities around wearing masks, hand washing, and social distancing. We are also very excited to continue to produce and explore all virtual possibilities, as it will support my vision to serve more Alaskans in remote regions. This is our mission as the Professional Theater of Alaska. And again, you get to what Leslie is talking about and her great leadership. I mean, and Art and other leaders as well have been thinking about it, Molly, so many people for years, around what does it mean to be in the state of Alaska? How do we reach people in different cities? How does the work that we create in Juneau travel outside of Juneau into other communities? And what is the form of theater culturally? How are people seeing it? How are they accessing it? Can they afford it? How all of that works. So I love the idea that this is an opportunity to think about rural communities, communities outside of just, we're making this one thing in this one space. I love that accessibility. I was speaking with my great friend Carrie Kellerman this morning. Carrie is the executive director of Whim Whim Dance Company in Seattle. And they said, Whim Whim is putting our dancers and artists first. A couple of years ago, Whim Whim made all of our dancers employees instead of contract workers, which is a rarity, as we know, for small theater companies, dance companies for sure. And we are committed to keeping them employed and paying them their salaries at this time. No one's been furloughed or laid off. We paused the launch of our 2021 season as soon as the pandemic hit, and we've rethought it completely as a digital experience. We aren't planning for any live performances until fall of 2021. And then they go on to say, looking at online portal and how people can access online, some content will be free and available for all, and some will be accessible with monthly or yearly subscription fee. We're also really trying to step up our social media game and find ways for folks to connect directly with dancers through IG live chats, etc. All of the social media content will be dancer driven, so that the audience will have so that the dancers will have a choice and a voice in what they're sharing and how they're sharing it. And I just thought, like, yeah, again, let's trust our artists. You know, it's not just Instagram takeover day, it's actually let artists lead, actually sit in a room with someone whose job it is to tell stories, think about how they want to connect with an audience. They know their form better than anybody. Let's let them lead. These are the moments where I'm hoping we really lean into that. Finally, I'm just hearing from my friend Patrick Mullins, who's the director of public works down at Virginia Stage Company in Virginia, and obviously, and he's focusing on student and community programs right now through the lens of their public works program and grounding everything they have in the values they've laid out. That is what they're focused on. So I'm hearing all of these things from all over, and I'm on, as you know, Zoom calls and boards and all this stuff all the time. And so I've heard so many exciting things. Are you hearing about anything that's kind of exciting or inspiring you right now in terms of new models or what people are thinking about?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's interesting. I've had more, I have had Zoom developmental readings, and now I've had a Zoom workshop, and it was interesting because, again, obviously this is not the traditional form for a workshop, and this theater, they are workshopping something that I can't say who it is, but like, who, though they are committed to producing it, they don't know when they're producing it. But in the meantime, they paid all the artists to work on it. They're putting time and money and dramaturgical resources into it, and it actually made a more intimate setting in terms of, it's me, it's all the actors, the director, the dramaturg, all within our homes, just concentrating on something, and it made for even richer, more intimate experiences. The other thing that I've experienced that I thought was really lovely and interesting is I've had all these conversations with artistic directors lately who are saying, what do you want to work on? Or what can I do? What do you need right now? And that has been really moving to me, because I think it's so lovely when leadership and obviously it's not always possible. A lot of institutions are in existential trouble, but I think it's lovely to ask artists and staff, what do you need? What can we give you? Not, sort of, it's not always a this is what we've structured question. It is tell us what your needs are and we can sort of figure it out. Yeah, but even just, and the other thing I have had too is a couple of invitations to do sort of much more personal sort of master classes, which are just engaging in very much this way with people who are interested with telling sort of, I wrote trying at being asked, and sometimes when you're just an artist, you can feel a little bit left out from the organizational structure of things, that you are sort of freelancing from place to place. I do make my living as a freelancer, but it's been interesting because lately I've had more institutions ask me, as we restructure things, can you tell us, can you come and give your opinion, or can you say like what you would be interested in? And even though I don't have all the answers, it's really empowering to feel like, oh, can I be a part of structural change even as a freelancer? American Theater Magazine had me, it was really like, they had me write a piece on what I sort of hoped for. They're doing a whole series called Pieces from Quarantine, in which they just ask artists to write about, in an open-ended way, what they're doing or what they're hoping for the future. And it was interesting to be asked to imagine in a broader scope versus just in a sort of fictional scope. And that's been really moving and interesting for me, because I do feel like we are people as a whole field who our job is to imagine things, opening the doors and saying, okay, if you could have anything to a bunch of, again, I think it should be open to everyone's staff, front of house artists, and saying, if we can restructure, what would you want, or what do you see for the field, is really moving.
I want to move to friends in the audience. If you have questions, so this would be the time. You have, I believe, at the bottom of your screen, a raise hand function. And so if you have questions that you'd like to ask Kate, feel free to go ahead and do that.
We do have one in the chat from Andra about using Zoom. That's kind of interesting.
So Andra, you said, I just want to promote this idea that I've had that would be so fantastic if Zoom could create a version of itself for theater. Specifically, I call it Zoom Black Box, but whatever it be called, if there could be a theater specific tool available to theater artists on Zoom, it would create so many opportunities for theater artists and audience to work and connect now above and beyond the opportunity that Zoom already provides, which are awesome, of course. Yeah, totally. Yes. Please, because we sort of take this format webinar version and we all work to try to make it happen, but I totally agree.
Yeah, it's like how Audible started an Audible Play series. Zoom, we are ready for you. We are ready. That's an awesome idea.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Let's go to Angela. Angela, you have a question for us. Oh, Julia, can you
just unmuting?
There we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Angela.
Great. Okay, so I'm really excited about your partnership with Augsburg, and of course that is geared toward university students. And I think there's so many fantastic things that will bring. But I have young children, and what this has prompted is a question to, where do you see opportunities for education at the lower levels, grade school, high school, people who, for two reasons, people who might not make it anywhere near a college, just to have more accessibility to theater, but also in what I've seen with my own kids, because they're very young, is that they don't have any preconceived notions about theater, actors, who's writing plays, who goes to theater, just that sense that they can do anything And yeah, I'm just wondering where you might see opportunities for education to reach them at that point before they're influenced, if you will, in any way.
Yeah. Kate, do you have thoughts on sort of early childhood experiences in theater and what you hope or think?
Yeah, I mean, I, like many people, I grew up in a very rural area, and I was not exposed to theater a lot. And it would have been incredibly empowering to me as a young person to, like, was pretty far along in my career before I could even sort of think of myself as a playwright or someone who could be in charge of generating those stories. So talk about generating work for artists. I think it'd be very interesting, as you were talking about with your friend Jeremy, to, in this pause, start thinking about, well, what if artists can go into classrooms, as they quite often do with Shakespeare and things, but what if there were more generative programs that are about teaching people something that's incredibly important, empowering about both theater, which creates empathy, and playwriting is you can reframe the focus and you can retell stories, and it's both therapeutic and useful. So yeah, I think this time is a time when parents, my brothers, are really looking for content, and I think that's would be a really fruitful tool, would be teaching more of this narrative structure to younger kids.
I think, Angela, also kind of everything Kate's saying, and then also I think about all the ways that this meeting, I think about the ubiquitous drama club or theater club or club or whatever in high school, and I know that's a much older group, but the reason I'm bringing it up is I think about, like, what are the benefits of why people gather around story, whether or not they're going to become professional theater artists or not, which sort of makes less difference to me, or I don't really care about it as much as you're saying, maybe, Angela, what are the benefits for young people right now? And if what it means is that it teaches sort of non-gender binary expected creativity patterns in kids because they learn to just express themselves where they are, and theater releases something in them, amazing. And what are the ways we can connect young people there? I mean, we think about that joy and innocence of that time, and how do we preserve that, and how do we foster that so that as they become older kids and then ultimately become young people in the world, they are bringing with them that curiosity and inquisitiveness. Like, I will just tell you that I have a 17-year-old, and he has 2 theater parents, and he hates theater, like, with a passion, really fiery passion, and like, doesn't understand it, thinks it's a disaster, like, really questions our life choices all the time. And but we joke about it at the dinner table, because I think when I hear him asking certain questions about politics, or certain questions about how women are treated, or certain assumptions that he would have heard around my son's biracial and how other kids of color are thinking about themselves in the world and what they're being told right now. And I think about his creativity and curiosity and understanding of history or understanding of storytelling, and saying, oh, there's a place for me in that, even if I'm not going to be a theater artist. So I know that was sort of a long roundabout way, but I believe that this practice, this art form, in all of its myriad kind of ways we approach it, is actually brilliant for young people. And I'm thinking we might actually find more ways of being able to connect them with it. So thank you for that question.
Thank you.
It looks like
we've got Donna, and then we have Darlene, whose raise hand isn't working, but we'll go to Darlene after. Donna.
Cool. So let's go to Donna. Hi, Donna, in San Diego.
Hi, Donna.
We're going to unmute you.
Yep. Just have to accept the unmute.
Accept your unmute, Donna. There you are.
Can you hear?
Yep, all good.
Okay. Kate, what do you consider to be your biggest challenge in adapting a novel the stage rather than just writing from your own experience?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's always different with every piece. I feel like one of the challenges is and at this point I'm really used to it, but one of the challenges is people feel very strongly about these novels. So sometimes they have an extremely heated response to what I always want to bring is something new to it and a new lens to it and make it surprising and challenge expectations with it. So at this point, I would find it very uninspiring and frustrating to me personally to do something that was just sort of a very expected traditional thing. But because of that, people sometimes get very upset at me. And while I have come to accept that as pretty much the toll I'm paying to keep going on the road, it is a little bit, I do get angry emails about it quite often, actually. And it only upsets me because I feel like, well, why don't we allow ourselves to be playful with this? Why are we sort of locking things away in, like, it should be laid in a tomb? Why is it supposed to be a museum piece? Why can't we sort of bring joy and irreverence or something interesting or something challenging to it? So it's a little bit every time I start one. I do have about a day where I'm like, oh, I'm really going to take my lumps on this one. But I think that's also the most rewarding part of it. Yeah, it's my favorite email I ever got just started out, "Dear Ms. Hamill, how could you?" But so that's it is the reason to do it, and also sometimes a challenging thing, and trying to tell an old story in a new way and not be derivative. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. How could you? I'm going to say that to you every time I see you now. Hey, how's it going? How could you? Darlene. I think you're
Darlene. There we go.
No. Okay. So I live in the winter in Southwest Florida and in the summer, nice months in Minnesota. Go to the Playwrights Center often. Our equity theaters in Southwest Florida to Naples to Fort Myers and Sarasota are offering full schedules starting next fall. And then I read about the Guthrie. So I'm really confused as to why some theaters are going ahead with full schedules next season and others are seriously cutting back. Is it size, location, outlook? What is it?
Well, I mean, what I can say is no theater in the country wants to be canceling shows. Nobody wants to be sizing back their season. These are heartbreaking decisions that everyone's making. So I think everyone, because this is a disease and a phenomenon and a crisis, which nobody in living, even my husband's 104-year-old grandmother who technically lived through the last pandemic has no real memory of how to handle this thing. I think everyone's just making the best decision they can based on their organization, especially public safety. I will say, every theater that I have worked with has been so responsible about wanting to take care of their audiences, really wanting to make the safe choice. So I do think, theaters, we tend to think of theater as an industry, but there's a very different need and budget and logistical challenge from reopening a Broadway theater, which is in New York City and has thousands of seats and depends on tourism, to opening a black box in another region. So I can't specifically speak to why different theaters are making different choices, but all I can say is, God, no one wants to be making those choices. It's just heartbreaking. Yeah, and I will say, again, while I don't think equity is all, and I love equity, they're one of my unions and I love them very much. While I don't think they're always like as proactive as I would like them to be on Me Too stuff, they're being very, very proactive about being protective of their artists and their artists' health in the midst of this. It is almost impossible to socially distance while rehearsing a show of more than one person. People kiss each other in shows and hold hands. So I do know equity is very much in those discussions right now, and I really appreciate that they're working on it, because there are some things playwriting one can do from afar. Directing, you can keep 6 feet from the actors at any time, but acting itself is hard. So I think everyone's guessing, and aside from that, it's just what your organization, what you can think you can bear. And there is also, there are upfront costs when you announce a season. So to cancel a show that's already been announced and developed, you've budgeted for things, paid out things. So sometimes they are, trying to be extra cautious so they're not basically breaking artists' heart and and
also that because I think the United States is so big, and as whenever I check in with someone, I sort of say, "How's your governor?"
yes.
That's the first question you ask. And at this point, our governor in Minnesota, as you know, is the amazing Tim Walz, who has been saying science is what matters, our people matter, we will prioritize the health and well-being of our people first. And I will, and every day, and every single, he does a press conference every day, he has asked that same question: how about now? Is now the time? When's the time? How is the time? And he's not saying, no, I'm being belligerent. He's saying, no, I have to be strategic and thoughtful, and every day we have new information. We make the best decisions possible. I agree with Kate. I think what you're seeing, and if you're comparing Minnesota with Southwest Florida, no state is handling it. There's no right or wrong, but I deeply believe in how the government of Minnesota is doing a good job and making its decisions right now. And yes, I'll just leave it at that.
What's heartbreaking about it is, in virtually every state, theater will be one of the last things to come back.
Yeah.
That's the nature of our work, and so I think everyone's sort of guessing when that will be.
Yep. Thanks, Darlene. Appreciate it. I think that's about the time we're kind of starting to wind down. Kate, I just wanted to be able to see if there's anything else you want to kind of leave us with today.
No, it's been such a pleasure. I'm so appreciative. I love you guys at the Playwrights Center. I love, I love the theater community of, I know people are in this chat from everywhere, but I want to give a special shout out to the theater community in Minneapolis and Minnesota. I've been very, very, very fortunate to work with so many of you, and I just think it's such an amazing community. And I sheltered in place there for when Emma closed the Guthrie very, very graciously, thank God for them, let me stay in their housing for 6 more weeks. So I feel like an honorary Minnesotan.
You are. You have been properly Minnesotized, I think, for sure.
I'm so grateful, but it's such an amazing community, and I'm just, I have no long-term fears for the overall health of Minneapolis and Minnesota's arts community. It's a hard time.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of visionary foundations here, and visionary philanthropists here, and visionary leaders here in so many sectors, from health and human services to the arts sector and beyond. And I think about service organizations like Springboard for the Arts that's based here and St. Paul, and so many American Composers Forum, just looking at, across branches. We've got so many incredible organizations who are doing work, and McKnight Foundation and the Knight Foundation, and all of this wealth of smart people who are going to be thinking about how best to take care of this community and are already doing it. And as you mentioned, just an amazing community of over 100 theater companies in Minnesota, around the state, and very proud to be part of this community and all that everyone's doing. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you all at home. It's been so great to have you with us for your great questions. Please, again, check out pwcenter.org if you want to join us for any other programming. If you also, we just say at the end, if you are interested in being a donor to the Playwrights Center, that money is going to pay artists right now as we're trying to hit that 200 number of 200 paid artists in the next chunk of time here. Please feel free to join us there in that way as well, so we can keep supporting the amazing artists in the community. Thank you all so much for being here today. It's so great to see you. Kate, thank you so much. Please take care of yourself, and we will see you all very soon.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you.